Welcome back to our podcast. I'm the gentleman, accompanied by the disturbed Southern Belle.
Hello.
And in this episode, we will be continuing our outlaws from around the world with Billy the Kid.
Whoop.
So, probably one of, if not the most well-known outlaw in American history.
True.
So, Henry McCarty was born on either September 17th or November 23rd of 1859. He is known as having changed his name later in life and gone by the alias William H. Bonney. However, he's most famously known as Billy the Kid.
Correct.
So as for his early life, he was born to Irish Catholic parents Catherine and Patrick McCarty in New York City. His birth year was confirmed as 1859, however the exact date has never been discovered. He also had a younger brother named Joseph, who was born in 1863. After the death of his father, his mother moved with her sons to Indianapolis, Indiana, and while there she met William Henry Harrison Antrim.
Mm-hmm.
They then moved with Antrim to Wichita, Kansas in 1870. Catherine and William married on March 1st of 1873 in Santa Fe, New Mexico Territory. Joseph decided to take his father's surname, however, Billy decided not to do so. Shortly after, Catherine passed away from tuberculosis on September 16th of 1874. After she passed, William abandoned the boys, leaving them to fend for themselves as orphans.
Ugh.
It's an absolutely disgusting human being.
It is. It's bad.
So, as for their first crimes, Billy was 14 years old when his mother passed away. Sarah Brown, who was the owner of the local boarding house, gave him room and board in exchange for work. And on September 16th of 1875, he was caught stealing food. Then only 10 days later, he, along with George Schaefer, went on to rob a Chinese laundry where they stole clothes and 2 pistols.
Okay. Alrighty then.
Now, just starting off, I can't blame them for resorting to crime. It was pretty much their only option
I get
at
that,
the time.
yeah. I get it, yeah. Because they were just little boys. So, yeah.
Their stepfather is an absolutely disgusting human being.
That's horrible. It is. It's horrible.
Anyways, Billy was charged with theft and put in jail, where he escaped only 2 days later, which is impressive.
It is.
Because he's 14.
Exactly.
Already escaping jail.
Exactly.
Very quickly, I might add. So this led to the first story, but obviously certainly not the last, to be published by him and his escape and theft in Silver City Herald. He was then able to locate the stepfather who abandoned him and his brother and stayed with him until he was ultimately made to leave.
Mm-hmm.
Before leaving, he stole clothing and guns from his stepfather.
All about to close, huh?
This would be the last time the two ever saw each other.
Good riddance, I guess.
Yeah, I agree. So after leaving Antrim, he then headed to southeastern Arizona Territory, where he started working as a ranch hand. However, he would then gamble his wages in nearby gambling houses, as one does.
Right.
So during this time, he became friends with John Mackey, who was a Scottish-born criminal and former U.S. cavalry private. The two set out stealing horses from local soldiers, because of course they did.
Well, yeah.
At this time, Billy became known as Kid Antrim because of his young age, slight build, and clean-shaven appearance, as well as his childish personality.
Right.
Sometime in 1877, he began to call himself William H. Bonney. On August 17th of 1877, while at a saloon in the village of Bonita, he got into an altercation with a man named Francis Cahill. Cahill was reportedly a known bully of the boy, and on more than one occasion referred to him as a pimp.
I know, that's weird, but okay.
Yeah. So, however, on this day, when Cahill launched a slur at Bonney, he called Cahill a son of a bitch, and this led Cahill to throw him to the floor, where the two then struggled for Bonney's gun.
Right.
Bonney was able to gain control of the weapon and mortally wounded Cahill. A witness of the event stated Billy had no choice. He had to use his equalizer.
It's equalizer. I love it.
Cahill died the next day, which...
Well,
oh no.
I guess if he's a Prick. Maybe that'd be better. I don't know. It
Yeah,
sounds like a dick.
yeah, he does. Anyways, this eventually caused Bonney to flee, and he would return a few days later, where he was then arrested by Miles Wood, who was the local justice of the peace.
Right.
He was then held in Camp Grant guardhouse, but was able to escape because, of course, he was before law enforcement could arrive.
Of course he did.
He stole a horse and headed to New Mexico territory. However, while on his trek, his horse was stolen by the Apaches, which left him to walk several miles to the nearest settlement. The stolen horse got stole.
That's not funny, but it is,
It's
right?
very funny. So he arrived at Fort Stanton, starved and near death. He went to the home of a friend and a member of the Seven River Warriors gang, John Johns, which is an interesting
It is
name.
very interesting, yes.
While there, John's mother, Barbara, nursed him back to health, and after regaining his strength, he then joined a band of cattle rustlers who raided herds that were owned by local cattle magnate John Chisholm. So, next is the Lincoln County War. After he had returned from New Mexico, Bonney began working as a cowboy for an English businessman and rancher of the name of John Henry Turnstall. The ranch was located near Rio Felix, which is tributary of the Pecos River,
Right.
in what is now Chavez County. So Turnstall, along with his business partner, Alexander McSween, were opponents of an alliance that had been formed by three powerful men named Lawrence Murphy, James Dolan, and John Riley.
Right.
So the men held an economic and political hold over the area, which was due in part to the ownership of a beef contract with the nearby Fort Stanton, as well as a well-patronized dry goods store in town.
So they had a lot of money, basically.
Yes, that is what it seems like.
And had people in their pocket, probably.
Most likely, yes. So, in February of 1878, McSween owed $8,000 to Dolan. I cannot speak today.
It's okay.
Anyways, owed $8,000 to Dolan, who had gotten a court order and asked Lincoln County Sheriff William Brady to either give or make McSween sell nearly $40,000 worth of his partner Turnstall's cattle and property to pay the debt.
Oh my God. So he's being greedy, isn't he?
He being greedy. So Turnstall put Bonney in charge of 9 of his most prime horses, asking him to relocate them to his ranch for safekeeping. During this time, Sheriff Brady was amassing a posse to seize Turnstall's castle. Turnstall learned of the posse on February 18th of 1878 and decided to ride out to intervene. During the encounter, a member of the posse shot Turnstall in the chest, which knocked him from the horse. Another member of the posse then took Turnstall's gun and finished the job by shooting him in the back of the head.
Oh, God.
Yes.
It's just sick.
Turnstall's death ignited the two factions, and led to what would later be known as the Lincoln County War. So, for the build-up to the war, after the murder of Turnstall, Bonney and a man named Dick Brewer both swore affidavits against the sheriff and his posse. They were able to obtain murder warrants from Lincoln County Justice of the Peace, John Wilson. On February 20th of 1878, while they were attempting to arrest Brady, the sheriff and his deputies found and arrested Bonney and the 2 men who were riding with him. However, Deputy U.S. Marshal Robert Weideman, who was a friend of Bonney's, captured Sheriff Brady's jail guards and put them behind bars before releasing Bonney and Brewer.
That's kind of funny. So he just lets him go.
This just seems like a lot of chaos, doesn't it?
It does. It's crazy.
Like, Billy the Kid, Bonney, gets a murder warrant for the sheriff. The sheriff arrests him, and then a friend of his,
lets him
another sheriff, basically, goes and arrests the other sheriff who arrested him.
More or less, yes. And then lets him go. Right. It's nuts.
It sounds like a Scooby-Doo skit.
It's crazy.
It genuinely does to me. Anyways, Bonney then joined with a group known as the Lincoln County Regulators, and on March 9th, they were able to capture Frank Baker and William Morton, who were the 2 men accused of killing Turnstall. Both men, however, were killed when it was claimed that they had tried to escape.
Oh, sure.
Yeah, I'm sure they did.
All right.
On April 1st, the group ambushed Brady and his deputies. Bonney received a wound to his thigh during the shootout. Brady, along with his deputy sheriff, George Hindman, were killed. So, on the morning of April 4th, Buckshot Roberts and Dick Brewer were killed during a gunfight that took place at Blazer's Mill.
Mm-hmm.
Warrants were then issued for several participants on both sides of the battle, which led to Bonney and two others being charged with killing Brady, Hindman, and Roberts.
Right.
On July 14th, McSween, along with the regulators, which were about now 50 to 60 men strong,
Good, great.
headed to Lincoln and stationed themselves in the town among several buildings. Meanwhile, at the McSween residence were several men, including Bonney, Florencio Chavez, Jose Chavez, or Chavez, whatever,
Mm-hmm.
and Jim French, as well as Harvey Morris and Tom O'Folliard, among others, were gathered.
Mm-hmm.
Another group, which was led by Doc Skurlock, positioned themselves on the roof of a saloon, while another group defended a nearby adobe bunkhouse.
Good God, they were ready, weren't they?
Yeah. So, on July 16th, the newly appointed sheriff, George Pepin, sent sharpshooters to kill McSween and his defenders of the saloon. However, Pepin's men retreated when one of their snipers, Charles Crawford, was killed.
Okay.
Not a very effective sniper.
Not really.
So, Pepin, undeterred, then sent a request for assistance to Colonel Nathan Dudley, who is the commandant of the nearby Fort Stanton.
Mm-hmm.
In reply, Dudley refused to intervene, but soon after arrived in Lincoln with troops, which turned the favor of the battle.
I guess so.
So on July 19th, a gunfight broke out. McSween, along with his supporters, were gathered at his house. Buck Powell and Jack Long set fire to the home, which caused the occupants inside to open fire. During the confusion, McSween was shot and killed by one of his men. That's kind of weird,
Right.
messed up, who was then killed by Bonney.
Okay, so he kind of shot him, so he shoots him. Okay.
So Bonney and the others were able to flee the house before all the rooms were consumed by fire.
Right.
So on August 5th of 1878, Bonney, as well as three others from the Battle of Lincoln, were near an area where a man by the name of Morris Bernstein was murdered. All four men were indicted for the murder. However, there was conflicting evidence that pointed to another assailant.
Mm-hmm.
All of the indictments, except for Bonney's, were later dismissed.
Of course.
On February 18th of 1879, Bonney, along with Tom O'Folliard, were in Lincoln when they were forced to witness the murder of attorney Houston Chapman, who was shot and his body then set ablaze, because of course it was.
Oh, you gotta get rid of the evidence in front of people.
Bonney later wrote to the governor offering information on the murder in exchange for amnesty. The governor then met with Bonney on March 17, 1879, where during the meeting and in subsequent correspondence, he promised Bonney protection from his enemies and clemency in exchange for his testimony before the grand jury. On March 20th of 1879, the governor wrote to Bonney stating that to ensure his safety, he would be detained in a local jail. On March 21st, he allowed himself to be captured, and as agreed, he provided a statement about the murder and then later testified in court. However, this is where it gets messed up. After he had held up his end of the deal, the DA refused to allow him to go free, and Bonney soon began to suspect that he had been duped by the governor and who had never intended to give him amnesty.
Sounds like it.
On July 17th of 1879, he escaped from the Lincoln County Jail.
Of course he did. I'm amazed it took him that long.
So, he managed to avoid any further violence until January 10th, 1880, at which time he shot and killed Joe Grant at Hargrove's Saloon in Fort Sumner, New Mexico.
Right.
The Santa Fe Weekly New Mexican wrote an article about the murder in which they stated, Billy Bonney, more extensively known as the Kid, shot and killed Joe Grant. The origin of the difficulty was not learned.
So they had no clue why. He just shot him.
Yeah.
Okay, got it.
Famous bandit shot and killed a man. That's all we know.
That's all we know. There you go. That's all you need to know.
According to sources that claim to have the real story, they claim that Bonney had been telling Grant that he intended to kill him. One day, he walked up to Grant and began to admire the revolver hanging from his hip. He asked if he could see the weapon, and Grant gave it to him. Before returning the weapon, Bonney noticed that the gun only had 3 bullets. So he positioned the barrel so that the next hammerfall would hit an empty chamber. As soon as Bonney handed the gun back, Grant then pointed the gun at Bonney's face and pulled the trigger. The gun, as expected, failed to fire, which allowed Bonney time to pull his weapon and shoot Grant in the head. Bonney was later quoted as saying, "It was a game of two, and I got there first."
I guess he did.
Yeah,
He's smart. You got to give him that.
he's a slick one.
He definitely is.
So, in 1880, Bonney became friends with Jim Greathouse, who then later introduced him to Dave Rudaball. Not exactly sure how to pronounce
I
this
think it's
name.
Rotoball or something like that.
Rudaball. In November of that year, the men were cornered at Greathouse's ranch. Bonney told the surrounding posse that the Greathouse was a hostage, and Deputy James Carlisle offered to switch places with Greathouse, and Bonney accepted. Later, Carlisle, while trying to escape by jumping out a window, was shot 3 times and died from his injuries.
Okay.
The shootout ended in a standoff, and the posse withdrew, leaving the outlaws to get away.
This man has a horseshoe up his rear end, though, really.
Oh,
I mean,
absolutely.
he does. I'm sorry.
So, a few weeks later, after this incident, Bonney, along with others, including Rudaball and O'Folliard, rode into Fort Sumner. However, they were unaware that a posse led by Pat Garrett was lying in wait for them. The posse opened fire on the unsuspecting men, killing only O'Folliard somehow.
Oh, good grief.
So, the governor placed a $500 bounty on Bonney's head on December 13th of 1880. Bonney, along with Rudaball and 2 others, were captured on December 23rd. They were first sent to Fort Sumner before then being moved to Las Vegas and New Mexico. The following day, after arriving in New Mexico, an armed mob gathered at the train depot. A deputy named Romero, who was backed by an angry group of men, demanding that Garrett give him Rudaball, who had killed another deputy during an unsuccessful escape attempt.
Okay.
So Garrett flat out refused the request, and a tense confrontation then ensued, which led to the sheriff and 2 other men to accompany Garrett and the detained outlaws to Santa Fe. They then planned to petition the governor to release custody of Rudaball to them. The Las Vegas Gazette ran an article on Bonney in which the report implied that Bonney appeared to be relaxed, considering his dire circumstances. To which Bonney is said to have replied, "What's the use of looking on the gloomy side of everything? The laugh's on me this time."
Well, I guess that's one way of being about it. I mean,
Yeah, absolutely.
so there you go.
So after finally arriving in New Mexico, Bonney sent 4 letters to the governor asking for clemency. However, the governor refused to help. In April of 1881, he went to trial in
Mozilla or something.
Missoula, New Mexico. After 2 days of testimony, he was found guilty of the murder of Sheriff Brady. He was sentenced to death by hanging, which was then scheduled for May 13th of 1881. He was then moved to Lincoln, where he was held under guard at the top floor of the courthouse. On April 28th of 1881, while Garrett was away collecting taxes, Deputy Bob Ollinger took 5 prisoners across the street so they could eat, which left Deputy James Bell along with Bonney. Bonney then asked if Bell would take him to the outhouse that was in the back of the courthouse. Bell agreed, and with Bonney leading the way, hid around the blind corner while walking up the steps to his cell. He managed to slip out of his handcuffs and then used them to beat Bell.
Oh my gosh.
During the ensuing altercation, Bonney managed to get Bell's gun and fatally shot him in the back as Bell was fleeing. With his legs still shackled, Bonney then broke into Garrett's office and took a loaded shotgun that had been left by Ollinger.
Oh gosh.
He then waited at the upstairs window, knowing that Ollinger would soon return to check on the gunshot that he had just fired. Upon approaching the courthouse, Bonney is said to have called out to Ollinger, saying, "Look up, old boy, and see what you get." Ollinger then looked up and leading to Bonney shooting him and killing him.
Well, I guess that's what he gets.
After working on his shackles with an axe for over an hour, he finally managed to free himself. He then stole a horse and rode out of town, with some witnesses claiming that he was singing as he rode along.
He may have been. He was known to be a little goofy, so I wouldn't doubt it.
So the governor then placed a new $500 bounty on Bonney's head. Then, after evading escape for roughly 3 months, Garrett heard rumors that Bonney was in the Fort Sumner area. On July 14th of 1881, Garrett and 2 deputies went to the home of Pete Maxwell, who was a known friend of Bonney's.
Mm-hmm.
Maxwell's son, Lucian, spoke with Garrett for several hours, then suddenly, around midnight, Bonney unexpectedly showed up at the home. According to Garrett, he at first did not recognize him due to the poor lighting. He states that Bonney then drew his gun and began backing towards the door while asking in Spanish, "Who is it? Who is it?" Garrett then says that he recognized the voice of that of Bonney, so he drew his revolver and fired twice. The first bullet struck him in the chest, just above his heart, while the second shot missed. Garrett never clarified if Bonney died instantly or lingered before passing. His body was identified as being Bonney, and he was later given a candlelight wake before being buried the next day, with his grave being marked by a wooden marker.
Right.
5 days after Garrett killed Bonney, he went to Santa Fe to collect the $500 reward. However, the newly acting governor refused to pay. The people of Las Vegas, Missoula, Santa Fe, White Oaks, and other cities raised over $7,000 in reward money for Garrett.
Good God.
That's a lot of money.
That's a lot.
A year and 4 days after Bonney's death, the New Mexico Territory legislature passed a special act that granted Garrett the $500 reward money he had been initially promised. There are still many who believe that Garrett ambushed Bonney and killed him in cold blood. However, there's no evidence. Right. So, this ends the story of Billy the Kid.
It's a good one, though.
Oh, it is.
He had a very interesting life. Now, I know there's, rumors that he survived, that's never proved, but whether he did or didn't, he lived a very cool life. He did.
Oh, absolutely.
I mean, it was filled with a lot of gruesome things. I'm not necessarily condoning the killing and things, but he lived a crazy life.
There's a reason he's an icon of American history.
So, exactly. But he's very cool.
So that's gonna wrap it up for this episode. We hope you enjoyed it. I know I did. Please join us again next time where we will be continuing this series. And don't forget to like, follow, and subscribe. And don't forget to stay disturbed.